Welcome back. We're now moving away from marketing. We're going into sales. When we talked about the value pyramid, we talked about the three things that were helping people transition and to move themselves from a transactional state to one based on relationships and value. The first was all around strategy. The second one was all about the different marketing paradigm shifts and the different ways of thinking about marketing. And the last one is what we're going to be talking about over the next 2 sessions. So let's talk about the sales cycle, and let's talk about some of the ways that these agencies were thinking differently about the way they did sales. Now, in this, we saw transitions very similar to the ones that we saw within marketing. First, we saw a move from a process to a cycle. Next, we also saw a change from being a transactional state or having a transactional mentality to one focused on the lifetime travel value of customers. We also saw a move from thinking about them as customers to actually thinking about them as evangelists for your business. We then saw this transition of away from packages and away from this static content to these co-created experiences. And last, we saw a move from not charging or actually getting minimal fees to actually charging fees reflective of the value that you bring. Let's look at each one of these. Now, traditionally, what you saw in the transactional life cycle or the process was one that started with all of this work that started for a pre-trip, meaning that's all the work to get through the awareness phase, the interested phase, to work with them on all of the planning of their itinerary and to get them actually scheduled and booked with the suppliers and get everything squared away, and then actually going on the trip. Now, as we saw with the pyramid, that's often where things stopped. What people were neglecting and what all of these agents and agencies were neglecting, except for those top ones, was the entire after trip. Now, we've come to call that the post trip. Now, when you think about this, you think about this as a cycle now, because the post trip is all about, one, cementing your connection with the customer, and then two, about then understanding what the next trip looks like. Start to seed that and start to prime that and get them thinking about that, knowing that it might not be 12 months away, it might actually be 18 months away, but then you start to have ideas of where are they going to want to go, what are they going to want to do, and how do I start to build that, and how do I enable that, and how do I start to make sure that that's top of mind as we move forward. So more than the pre-trip and the trip, you've now got this entire second half focused on closing the loop. Now, what happens when we then start to think about that from a transaction and going to the lifetime travel value of a customer? What you see there, again on this slide, is you have the pre-trip, the trip, and the post-trip. Now, if you're doing that right and you're priming yourself and you're seeding that next trip, you see that that feeds the second trip. So every single trip now acts as your means to begin the next trip. That becomes the pre-trip for the next trip. And what we saw from some of the best agencies is that they were then able to turn this into part of a much bigger plan. Now, what I will say is that there was not a single agency that was doing a great job of this. There was not an agency that was trying to create a roadmap for the lifetime travel aspirations of a customer. Think about other industries. Can you think about another role or another type of person who might look at that lifetime value? When I think of this, I think of financial advisors. When you sit down with a financial advisor, what are they doing? They're trying to understand your goals. They're trying to understand your time frame and when you're trying to do these things. And then they plan with you and they help you get there. Why couldn't you do that same type of plan, but have that be travel related? Why can't you become their consultant instead of their travel agent or their advisor? Why couldn't you be in a similar role? And why couldn't you get to that sort of relationship with the customers? So this was something that was a transition that we were starting to see. But like I said, there was not anything that was being really well executed in this area. Huge opportunities here. Next, from customers to evangelists, let's just for a moment revisit some of the topics and some of the information that has come up along these sessions. We talked about the value pyramid, and we talked about how a goal is to move people up into that loyal stage. You want as many people in that loyal bucket as possible. And why is that? Well, think back to that survey data that we had. 80% of agency owners and agents said that referrals and word of mouth were one of the best, most valuable ways to get customers in the pipeline. Those are high quality leads. Those are leads that were leading to better conversions. And then think about in sales, what was the most used tactic, or what was the most used way that you were able to bring business in? You responded that it was the customer relationship. It was what you were able to do to connect with them. So when we think about this holistically, those loyal people and getting them there becomes even more important, because now they're not just customers of yours, they're evangelists. There's people that are starting to be your referrals. They're telling people about you. They're using word of mouth. And the great part of that is that that's not as expensive as some of those other mechanisms. What you're also seeing is that through that, you've been embedding yourself and creating these strong, enduring relationships. So stop for a second and have a discussion maybe with some of your peers or some of your agents. If you're an agent, have it with some of your other agency peers. How are you turning your customers into evangelists? That question is going to be critical as you think about the way that you do sales. Let's talk about static packages to this notion of these co-created experiences. First, let's define that, because there's some ambiguity there around what does co-creation really mean. When we look at that, the definition is really around co-creation to be a forum with which people can come together. That can be agents, that can be agency owners, that can be customers, that can be partners. It can be just about anything. But people are coming together, and what are they doing? They're sharing, they're combining insight, and they're renewing each other's resources and capabilities and relationship. So what do you get from that? You get new forms of interaction, new forms of engagement. Maybe new services might show themselves. You might get new opportunities to learn and to grow and to improve. There's lots of benefit that comes from that. And when you think about that even more, where is all of that value also coming from? From the personalized, unique experiences that come out of that. And it's not something that you do in isolation. If you're having a co-created experience with your customers, what's happening there? You're connecting with them, but you're also coming to a better place, one that you both have gone on the journey together with. They're more bought in with the output from that. And through that, you're going to get more revenue, you're going to get greater learning, and you're going to get enhanced market performance drivers. You're going to get people talking about the experience that they had with you. How many other agencies do you see out there are doing these co-created experiences? We didn't see very many. That is what's going to drive loyalty. That is, again, another huge opportunity in the sales arena for you. Now, stop and pause this video and say, how would you go about creating this co-created solutions with customers and partners? How would you do it? Who would you bring in? Who would you maybe start and pilot this with? What would that look like? Start to answer some of those questions. Now, the big sort of gorilla in the room here is this movement from not charging or getting minimal fees to getting fees reflective of value. First, I want to ask you a couple of things. Are you investing in knowledge and insight within your business? Meaning, are you doing product and service training? Are you going out and you're getting different experiences so that you can sell based on what you know and you've actually done? If you're doing those things, don't you think that you're building your capabilities? Don't you think that you're building the value that you bring? I would say that you do. Now, because of that, you should be then charging a premium for that. So let's look at that a bit. Now, when you look at this pay-to-play model, what does that mean? That means just to get in the door, just to do business with you, you're going to have to pay. Another model that we saw quite frequently in these different agencies was a pay and deduction, meaning I pay you up front, and then as long as I book the trip with you eventually, that money will go towards my trip. And the last sort of generic model that we were seeing out of agencies was this notion of stage planning fees, meaning my target for a certain destination or for a certain trip may be $500 in fees. How do I get there? And where do I charge? And how do I make that reflective of the value that people are experiencing along the way? This is important. If you are not charging fees, you really need to reevaluate that. You are no longer the distribution mechanism of choice for suppliers. A lot of suppliers can now go direct to customers. So where are you bringing value in? Those are the areas that are likely customer facing that you need to start to figure out and you need to start to charge for. So, do you charge fees? And if so, how do you do it? And is it enough? And if you're struggling with this, reach out to your network. Ensemble Travel Network is a group of just about 850 agencies. Are there others that you could talk to and ask how they're doing it? Maybe there's a group that's exemplary that you feel is doing a great job of this. How are they doing it? Could you talk to them about it? This is not something that I'm really giving enough of the due diligence and the effort for because we just don't have the time in a video series. But you need to follow up with this. Have some really good conversations. Now with that, what have we talked about? We've talked about some of the major shifts that have gone on between the way that your average sales organization or that your average agency is differentiating in the sales process and using that to its advantage versus how some of these top agencies are thinking about it. I will go back and think about each one. And again, similar to the marketing principles and the marketing shifts, identify a couple that you may be able to implement and that you may be able to carry and run with. Thank you for your time.